most gracious, the most merciful. At the outset, I would like to thank the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies for floating such ideas, especially when it comes to the Iranian nuclear agreement, whereby the President of the United States of America said it is a historical understanding. However, Netanyahu said that it is a bad deal that threatens Israel. Saudi Arabia has talked about this framework whereby it might resemble a Middle East void of nukes. However, some of the countries feared such agreement. Turkey, for example, accepted this deal and it thought that it will resemble a new chapter, especially when it comes to the economic privileges and the lifting of the sanctions. And Turkey hopes that the exports to Iran will be emphasized as well as to tap into the energy sector. Here we'll be talking about this matter from three perspectives. First, from the Arab perspective, Mr. Khaled Al Dakhil. On his behalf, Sheikh Suhaim Al Thani will be talking about the same paper. And from the Turkish perspective, Birol Baskan will be talking to us about the same matter. And Mahmoud Muhareb will be talking about the Israeli stance on the Iranian nuclear agreement. First, Mr. Khaled Al Dakhil from Saudi Arabia will be delivering the speech, or perhaps Sheikh Suhaim on his behalf will be presenting this paper. He's a researcher at the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies. He had obtained a master's degree in political sciences, international relationship from London, and I'll allocate 15 minutes for every panelist. Please abide by the time. Please, Sheikh Suhaim, the floor is yours.
In the name of God, the most merciful, most compassionate, I'll be presenting on behalf of Dr. Khaled Al Dakhil, who could not come due to some unseen circumstances on the issue of the nuclear, or actually the political aspect of the nuclear deal. The framework agreement between Iran and the 5+1 and any possible implication on Saudi Arabia and the GCC countries it's a political issue before it being technical, so to speak, because the agreement will stop Iran from producing a nuclear weapon for a 10 to 15 years period, and this will allow the Arab countries to develop their infrastructure and to acquire nuclear technology, not only the peaceful one, but for military purposes also, if the need arises. In other words, the Arab countries can benefit from the Japanese module and reach the scenario whereby they have all the capabilities to make a bomb without assembling the final product. And this will allow the Gulf countries to become what's known as a nuclear threshold state. In case when Iran decided to acquire a nuclear weapon at the end of the agreement period, But this has been a choice for 3 decades, and of course, this will allow the Saudis, or place restraints rather, on their ability to politically maneuver. And the other reason is the central issue here is a political one, and what is even more dangerous than the nuclear threat is Iran's sectarian intervention in Arab countries, and also the establishment of ideologically driven militias, which together provide the catalyst for Iran's intervention. And the situations in Iraq and Syria are a vivid example of this, and prior to that, the case of Hezbollah in Lebanon. And what is strange is, despite this fact and the fact that Iran is a neighboring country to Gulf countries, the Gulf countries were made absent from attending the negotiations, and the negotiations were politically justified because Iran's political aspirations or sectarian aspirations are rejected by the vast majority of the Arab people, especially by Saudi Arabia and Egypt, which are the biggest and the most coherent countries in the region, have not come up with a counter project to Iran's project in the Arab world. And what is important also is there is a need for Arab countries, whether at the nationalist level or at the level of the Arab League, to counteract this devastating Iranian intervention. And all of this should be done within the context of a political and economic project which enhances the state in Arab countries as a democratic state, as an alternative to the sectarian state which the Iranian project is built on. And the absence of such project on the part of the Arab countries, which will result in militarizing the population, similarly to what Ba'athists tried in Syria and Iraq, and also the absence of such an Arab project leaves the doors open to the Iranians to interfere in this destructive manner. So therefore, at the end of the day, the reading of the situation should be based on this aspect. Thirdly, President Barack Obama's perspective here, which I'll briefly answer first, and then I'll try to deduce some political conclusions, and also the position of America's Arab allies. The American president is basing his position on three considerations. First of all, Iran has achieved some technological know-how and infrastructure which cannot be ignored, and secondly, which can lead to making a nuclear bomb, and secondly, both the reformists and conservatives in Iran are in agreement on Iran achieving a nuclear weapon, which really cancels out any military options, and the military option can do nothing but to postpone Iran's ability to produce a bomb till a few years later. So therefore, it's better to resort to negotiations and based on the framework agreement. Iran, in a period of 10 to 15 years, will be able to produce a nuclear weapon because the agreement allows Iran to continue in the field of research. So what are the choices after when the period of this agreement runs out? It seems that Obama's vision is based on America having the military capabilities and the abilities to reconstitute sanctions, and this is evident from his interview with the New York Times when he said that Iran's expenditure on the military does not exceed $30 billion, whereas America's one is over 600 billion. And here we see a contradiction in the position of the American administration. On the one hand, he recognizes the breakthrough the Iranians have achieved, and secondly is basing the negotiations choice on the lack of any military options and recognizing Iran's ability at the end of the agreement period of 10-15 years of being able to produce a weapon. So therefore, he is taking a risk, and we must not forget that Obama's second term in office will run out in about a year and a half. And what's even more important, that the responsibility will be shouldered by his successors. And also, President Obama wishes maybe that the lifting of the sanctions and the success of the agreement and the foreign investments coming to Iran will create the kind of economic boom that will make the population more convinced to stand against any nuclear options. And this time round, the effect will take place from the inside rather than an outside intervention. And Obama's wishful thinking seems to be based on the large margin of maneuver that he has, but it seems that he has not taken into account the Arab calculations and the Gulf calculations in particular. But I don't think the blame should chiefly be placed on Obama, but on Obama's Arab allies, and mainly Saudi Arabia, because if Obama decided that this is his best choice and to have this agreement, and this can only mean one of two things. Either the Arabs could not provide the administration with a comprehensive view of what's happening and the destructive role of Iran in the region, or they have presented him with this reading and analysis, but he decided to ignore them. And in either case, the first and most important reason for America's discord in its position with the Arabs is either short-sightedness on his behalf or on behalf of his Arab allies, and also not linking any nuclear agreement on Iran's mischievous political behavior is the real danger here. And it seems that America has decided to reach an agreement with Iran and keep Iran behaving the way it has done. As for Arabs, they don't have a clear vision, a coherent vision, neither on the level of the Arab League or the countries individually. There is some Saudi and Gulf rejection, apart from Oman, and some rejection from Morocco. But Egypt is different, and in Iraq, and all the Shiite powers are empathizing with the Iranian position. Syria is the same because of they need Iran to sustain their regime. And maybe for this reason, the Arab position, the non-official grassroots positions in the Arab countries have been rather different, whereas they expected America to be tougher in the negotiations. They do not seem to understand that the American administration is basing its position on very clear considerations so far as it's concerned, and the lack of clarity is on the Arab part, and they're basing their thinking on wishful thinking rather. It's true, the Americans have based everything on their interests and ignored the interests of the Arabs. That's true, but who is responsible for that? Any analysis of the situation will prove that it's no longer viable for the Arab countries to rely on American protection, because American calculations now has kept the Arabs outside this equation, and this is what served Iran after the collapse of the Iraqi regime. And it seems that this is a declaration now that the Saudis cannot afford to stay outside this equation any longer, and vis-à-vis Iran's insistence on increasing and enhancing its power and having a nuclear option has forced America to deal with it this way. And also America's banking on the change coming from inside rather than outside, and also the fact that the decisive military campaign was waged only days before the announcement of a deal is a response. And it seems that Saudi Arabia specifically, although it's known to have very quiet and deliberate foreign policy, it seems that Riyadh is saying that it can no longer accept Iran's role, and repeating what Iran has done in Iraq, Syria, or other countries. And the fall of Iraq and Syria under the influence of Iran requires it to act differently now, and it brings signs that Saudi's approach to its own national security and the national security of the Gulf areas requires it to be more decisive. Thank you.
Wow, wow. Thank you, Sheikh Suhaim bin Thani, who delivered the speech of Dr. Khaled Al Dakhil from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, who had certain other things to do. He apologized for coming. The gentleman has talked about the Arab perspective vis-à-vis this framework agreement. Now we'll move to another perspective from Turkey vis-à-vis this framework. Dr. Birol Baskan, he's an assistant professor at the Georgetown University School of Foreign Service in Qatar. He received his PhD in political science from Northwestern University in 2006. He has published in various academic journals. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting to this very informative conference on a very timely topic, Iranian nuclear weapons. What I am going to do, I'm not expert on nuclear physics or anything. What I want to do today is to provide a perspective on Turkey's reactions to the recent agreement. And from that reaction, I want to deduce the Turkey's policies towards Iranian nuclear program from the beginning. Then I will conclude. So if I just look at some of the reactions from the higher rankings of the Turkish state, the Ahmet Davutoğlu, Prime Minister, for example, just after the agreement was reached, he said, as Turkey, we see the stage reached in the negotiations as a positive stage. Everybody must act responsibly to push this process forward and positively evaluate it for the regional stability. So this is the Prime Minister. Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mevlut Çavuşoğlu, said, we are very happy that an agreement was reached. Yet the position the P5+1 brought Iran to is still behind the position we could make it agree to in 2010. But we hope that Iran will come to that position by the end of June. And this is Taner Yıldız, Minister of Energy, said, Turkey is the country which has made the most contribution to lifting these sanctions on Iran. We know that the made agreement will not cover all areas, all sanctions. There are restrictions that are due to nuclear-related reasons only. By the way, I'm really translating literally. This is what he exactly said, not giving my own interpretation to it. For example, they didn't announce whether lifting sanctions will extend oil and natural gas. So these are so overall reaction of Turkey to the agreement was very positive. Turkey declared at the highest level that the agreement is very welcomed. And to my knowledge, the negotiators also accepted the fact that Turkey contributed to this outcome. Turkey worked to bring this outcome together. So Turkey basically differs from the Arab world, especially the GCC, regarding the agreement. So, as you know, and some of my colleagues in the previous panel also mentioned 2010 nuclear swap deal, which was initiated by Turkey. At that time, Ahmet Davutoğlu was Minister of Foreign Affairs. He said, the swap deal signed by Iran today shows that Tehran wants to open a constructive path. There is no more ground for new sanctions and pressures on Iran. So as you can see from these comments, you can derive some principles that guided Turkey's position on nuclear program. There are basically, I can deduce two of them. The first one is that, which sounds like a pro-GCC position, Iran should not possess nuclear weapons. It is very equivocal on that. Turkey has been very equivocal on this. But Turkey adds a condition to this statement. It said, but neither should Israel. The second principle that Turkey has guided Turkey's position is that the solution should be in diplomacy. Neither military intervention nor economic sanctions will work, but rather they are going to exacerbate the conflict. These two basically have guided the Turkey's position. If we go into to depths of these two positions, we will arrive at the following. Iran should not possess nuclear weapons, but neither should Israel really amount to this. In fact, Israel has nuclear weapons. So rather than preventing Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons, international community must work to denuclearize Israel. This is the implicit equivalent of what Turkey's position is, which is not literally, but practically means that Iran can have nuclear weapons. So why Turkey has such a position? Well, I guess here I should add that if the Turkish military were in a powerful position in Turkey today, I guess Turkey's position would be very different. Turkey, I would claim that, would both agree with the international community on military intervention or even economic sanctions, and would side with the GCC in terms of the solution to Islam. But the thing is that the ruling party in Turkey comes from a political Islamist tradition in Turkey. And that tradition has been hardcore anti-Israel and anti-Semitic. So this is Necip Fazıl Kısakürek, a very famous Islamist poet, and also Erdogan likes to quote him a lot in his speeches. So he's the number one kind of a mind maker of Erdogan. He said this: have you just said the Jews? This is a very famous statement from the Islamist literature in Turkey. Have you just said the Jews? They are those damned people who will not hesitate to burn the whole world just to cook their eggs. So this anti-Semitism, anti-Israel position is so ingrained in the Islamist reading and interpretation of the history of the Middle East. And from that reading, from that imagination, from that discourse, you arrive at the following very conspiratorial idea. That is, there is this international Jewry, which is the mastermind behind every single tragedy that befall upon the Muslims. From the deposition of the Abdul Hamid II, if you remember, Abdul Hamid II refused to give land to the Jews, to the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, from the abolition of the Caliphate in 1924 to the 9/11, whatever tragedy, whatever event that the Islamists think is a tragedy for the Muslims is engineered and executed by this international Jewry. This is the perception. And then you can see that all around in the Turkish Islamist literature on whatever topic that you are talking about. So, according to this reading of history, Israel is the ultimate fruit of international Jewry's thousands of years of work, deception, conspiracy, and so on and so forth. So, Israel is more dangerous than Iran for the Turkish Islamists, for the ruling party, whoever making is the decisions in Turkey right now. They are coming from this tradition, and then this is in their analysis. This is ingrained in their reading and analysis of the Middle East. Here, Iran has a much more positive stance than most of the GCC countries. Actually, Iran is a victim, is a victor, or is not a real danger, is not a threat, but rather a victim of the same international plot that the Jews have been planning and executing for hundreds of years. So, because of this, I would say it is very difficult to persuade, and I am speaking here from a personal experience, that Iranian nuclear program is real, and Iran might really go for a nuclear weapon, and which might be threatening to the regional security, regional stability. This is a very difficult sell to Turkish Islamists. Here, in terms of their reading of their analysis of the international, they are not really talking about like a nationalist interest here, but more like a thinking of the Ummah, that there is Israel, that's a threat to the Ummah, so the whole Muslim nations should come together, work together to contain this threat. Iran is not the threat, Iran is not the problem, and actually, implicitly, there's this idea that, well, if Iran gets nuclear weapon, that's good, because that's going to balance Israel in the region. So again, I am speaking here from a personal experience. I have debated with Turkish Islamists for, I don't know how many years right now, 5 years, 6 years, about Iran issue, that it's almost impossible to persuade them that Iran might be a threatening. Again, here I have my own personal position, but it's not really informed one. I really don't know Iran threat is real or imagined. As Professor Hamid Dabashi warned, I guess we should be more, as academic, as intellectual, we should be much more careful about just going directly into this political game. I guess we should have a much more distant view. But what I'm trying to do here is that the Islamists in Turkey are very much convinced of their position that this is an international plot, and this nuclear issue is another way that Israel and an international Jewry is putting fitna among the Muslims, and we should really stand together to be unified, and then be very careful. So when, for example, if Turkey or the government in Turkey appears to be very tough on Iran on the nuclear issue, he cannot persuade his constituency on this. I guess here is the great difference that Turkey has vis-a-vis the GCC states. This is the kind of an ideational argument that I will make. As I said, I personally had difficult times to talk about these issues in Turkey. Actually, possibly in the Middle East, where you have everything is explained by an international conspiracy, it's very difficult to make an objective analysis. But there are other issues that I guess why Turkey has this position, which has to do with the second principle that guided Turkey's position. Turkey wants to solve Turkey wants to solve the crisis diplomatically. Neither economic sanctions nor military intervention work. Again, to a certain extent, this is to prevent the Turkish military becoming an important player again. Turkish government does not want to securitize the Iranian issue. Once the Iranian crisis becomes securitized, then you have military is going to come back. But there are other issues. The first one is that, and I have been telling this to my Arab friends since my 8 years here, and then I couldn't persuade anyone either on this. Iran is dear to Turkey as much as, if not more, than the Arab world. And of course, you might be thinking about the sectarian, like, oh, Turkey is Sunni, Arab world is Sunni, Iran is Shia. I don't think that in the political Islamist kind of an ideological landscape, this difference, sectarian difference, make any sense in the Turkish case. Actually, it is something that the Turkish Islamists must overcome so that, again, we can have a stand on it. So why Iran is dear? There are materialistic reasons in addition to the ideological one. The first one is that the Turkey's export to Iran and the GCC are almost all equal levels. So Iran is a very important market for Turkey. We are talking about the whole GCC and Iran are on the same level in terms of the significance for the Turkish economy. And moreover, this is very important, if you look at the trade balance, sometimes Iran even surpasses the GCC in terms of the overall trade volume. Iran as a market is more important than the GCC to Turkey. There's a very obvious reason for that. Iranian market is highly protected, and Turkish companies can make better deals in the Iranian market than in the GCC countries. And in the GCC, basically Americans, Germans, Japanese, Koreans, and all of these Western companies have a very competitive stance compared to the Turkish case. Basically, without a political intervention, Turkish companies cannot really make a good presence in the GCC market. And Turkey is aware of that. In Iran, the challenge is less. In Iran, you are not competing with any Western country. You are just alone. So I guess this should be kept in mind. And let me tell you this. Right now, Erdogan's objective is, with the Iranian trade volume, is $30 billion. That is the target set for economic relations between Iran and this is double of the trade volume between Turkey and the GCC. I guess the GCC countries should take this into account. And more importantly, I guess, unfortunately, I don't have time to talk about this. You know, everybody knows Europeans' dependence on Russian gas. And guess what? Turkey is just in the middle of Europe and then the gas fields on the east part of Turkey. And Turkey's great desire is to be an energy link, energy transit road between the East and Europe. And guess what? Iran is a major player in this. Without Iran, Turkey cannot, can only get gas from the Arab world, but from Central Asia and from Iran itself, Turkey cannot get gas to sell or to transport to Europe. That's why, in order to realize or put Turkey into this energy at the center of the world natural gas trade, I guess Iran cooperation is critical, indispensable, and then that's why Iran is more dear and sometimes much more critical than the GCC. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Birol. It was a personal, perhaps a Turkish one. I would like to thank him. Now we'll move to the Israel stance on the Iranian nuclear agreement. Mahmoud Muhareb will deliver the paper. He is an associate researcher at the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies, Palestinian academic. His publications cover Zionism and Israel, the Palestinian cause, and he is a graduate from Reading. Thank you. The floor is yours. Thank you, Mr. Faleh. I'll be talking about the Israel stance vis-a-vis the framework agreement. Tackling this issue requires the following. First, it is important to allude to the fact that there is a difference between the Israeli rationale and the GCC rationale, as well as Turkey in this regard. Israel has a nuclear and hydrogen arsenal, as well as neutron bombs, as well as tactical nuclear weapons. In addition to that, it has the levers to exploit such technology, to run it, and to make a second kind of attack. Indeed, Israel is a nuclear state par excellence, and it has a command and control center when it comes to launching a nuclear war. It was built, the center was built recently, and it makes Israel capable of launching a nuclear war on a par with the Soviet Union, Britain, France, America, and the preparations. So Israel is prepared for launching a nuclear weapon, a nuclear war. In contrast, in the Middle East, the Arab countries do not possess such capability. Second, Israel is the only country that used the weapons in 1991. It targeted the Iraqi nuclear center. It did so in Syria as well. There's also efforts that have been exerted in Israel for the last 2 decades, and it aimed at exploiting or monopolizing this technology and preventing Iran from getting into the bomb. There's another point. The aim, or the main aim of monopolizing the nuclear weapon is to preserve its status, its prestige as the most powerful in the region. There's another point. Monopolizing the nuclear weapon is part and parcel of the national security theory of Israel, and it is one of the most important components that is influential in bullying and spreading, exerting the clout, being aggressive, and being belligerent against all the people in the Arab world. Fifth, and this is a very important point as well, the USA in 1969 has agreed, in accordance with an understanding between Golda Meir and Nixon, they agreed on having Israel a non-declared nuclear state. And in accordance with such agreement, Israel committed to the fact that it will not declare the status of being a nuclear state. And indeed, pressures were waived in terms of acceding the NPT, and pressures as well were waived vis-à-vis the inspection and the verification mechanisms. And since then, with every single election, this was not entrenched in the Congress, but it was an understanding between the American administration and the Israeli government. Every other elected president will understand this matter, and Israel renews such understanding. Obama, when he was elected, some feared that he would disclose the matter. However, at the end of the day, he was compelled to not lift the lid on such a nuclear capacity. So this is the policy. This ought to be debated. When we have a debate with the USA, we need to look at the concepts. Why the USA agreed on having Israel monopolizing the nuclear weapon. This is important. Second, what is the influence or the effect of such monopolization on the belligerent attitude of Israel, as well as the public opinion of Israel, i.e., the Israelis and the Israeli communities, they move day after day towards extremism, towards belligerence, because of this power, because of the nuclear weapon, and because of the peculiar relationship with the USA and other factors. And thus, this ought not to be taken for granted or a parameter that is unnegotiable. As a matter of fact, the bottom line when it comes to dealing with the nuclear weapons, the bottom line is as follows. Why the USA preserves or perhaps defends the monopolization of the Israelis of the nuclear weapon. I'd like here to talk about the reaction of Israel vis-à-vis the framework agreement. There is a consensus, Israeli consensus, that relates to the sustainability of the monopolization of such weapons in the Middle East by Israel. However, there is no consensus on the methods that ought to be followed to prevent Iran from getting to the bomb, especially when it comes to the acute showdown between Netanyahu and the US administration vis-à-vis this very issue. The main criticism that the opposition parties are leveling against Netanyahu relates to the declared showdown with Obama vis-à-vis such program, and the opposition's call upon Netanyahu to establish a better relationship with Obama, to build confidence in order to move forward. The reactions in Israel was in some cases extreme, and in some cases were to do with conditioning kind of acceptance. The Netanyahu party was an extremist in his comment on the deal. I think he said that Iran poses a threat. This is far-fetched because Israel poses threats on all the countries that surrounds it, but they have reversed the matter. And the acceptance of such a deal reluctantly was propagated amongst some of the opposition parties. Netanyahu, 2 decades ago, opposed indeed any political deal with Iran. He always used his clout, and he pressurized and threatened the use of the military intervention. And because of certain internal US politics, it was unfeasible to do so, and thus he tried different methods to make the sanctions posed on Iran more harshful. He talked about the interim agreement in 2003. He said it is a very bad deal, and then he claimed that the framework in Lausanne is a bad deal as well. And when he was told that you are calling for war, he said no, I wouldn't call for war, but he said he needs a good deal. What is a good deal in the eyes of Netanyahu? I think it is to do with curbing the infrastructure of the nuclear program. And that's why he goes to the Congress, and he has certain relationships with the evangelical kind of stream in America, the IPEC and so on and so forth, to pressurize the US administration to fail the program and to amend it greatly. Some people had their own reservations. I would like to be brief here and say that the opposition in Israel and those who had their own reservations floated some ideas. Most importantly is as follows. First, the framework agreement provides legitimacy for Iran, internationally speaking. That means Iran will be legitimate to have this program, and it will be difficult for Israel to attack Iran militarily, and because such attack will be in violation of the agreement itself. Secondly, the agreement confirms that Iran is a nuclear marginal state. There is no definition to the nuclear marginal state. What we mean by this, for the state to have the infrastructure, the resources, and the expert to have a breakout capacity that is very short. People in Israel talk about the breakout capacity and to what extent Iran can have the capacity to make the bomb. What is the timeline? And they say, despite this framework agreement and despite all the items, Israel is still, or Iran is still, a nuclear marginal state, and if it carries on being so for a decade or so, then there is a potential to have a clandestine kind of program to conceal what's going on, and then it will become a nuclear one. So this ambiguity will lead Israel to deal with Iran as a nuclear state. This is dangerous, and they want to prevent Iran from being indeed a marginal one in the first place. There's another point. The framework will open the door for a nuclear race in the region, and some countries in the Middle East will follow suit, like Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Egypt. And here, in accordance with the Israeli literature and research, there is an Israeli concern vis-à-vis the obtainment of Saudi Arabia of the nuclear weapon. They are concerned not because of the program itself, however, they are concerned because of the relationship between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. And there are different scenarios that they're floating. They say that a federal or alliance or some sort of channel can be opened whereby the nuclear weapon can be moved from Pakistan to Saudi Arabia. I think that this is serious, and as we can see, there are recommendations by think tanks and policymakers saying that stringent verification mechanisms ought to be taken place. Fourth, this framework emphasizes the role and the clout of Iran in the region, and it puts an end to its isolation, and this will lead to emphasizing the status of its alliances, whether they were state or non-state anchors. Fifth, Saudi Arabia might obtain advanced technology and advanced weapons technology, and this will lead to the loss of Israel being the underdog rather than having the upper hand. Also, Iran might violate the agreement, and this might have negative implications, and the sanctions can be snapped back. In addition to that, those who had reservations focused on a number of pending issues, like having the 10 million enriched uranium expelled from Iran, and to have a clear text to prevent Iran from having research facilities to develop the centrifuges. As a matter of fact, I had only 2 minutes left. I would like to be brief. There is a consensus, kind of consensus. Israel has no option of leveling or attacking Iran, perhaps militarily, since 2013, because the solution is political. Netanyahu is expected to oppose the deal through the Congress and through the Israeli lobby in America in order to fail the deal, and this is far-fetched, or perhaps to pressurize the US administration to make radical changes or amendments to the deal itself, to have, for example, remunerations or military trade-offs from the USA to Israel that the US has not provided, for example, advanced technology and so on and so forth. In addition to that, for the US to reconfirm Israel's supremacy in the region and to emphasize the monopolization of Israel of the nuclear weapons, and to have safeguards from the USA and not to be pressurized to accede to the NPT, as well as to emphasize the security safeguards that might resemble a military kind of compact or contract between the two. Also to emphasize the intelligence sharing, not only to follow up the nuclear Iranian program, but the other projects that might surface in the other countries, and to have money funneled to do such verification and follow-up. If Iran reached the nuclear weapon, here we're not talking about it, but the studies said the following: despite the efforts that Israel might exert, Iran might get the nuclear weapon. What would Israel do? They say that Israel might do the following. Israel might declare that it has the nuclear weapon in the first place. Second, it might join the NATO. Third, it might have an alliance and a joint defense agreement with the USA. And fourth, to open a dialogue with nuclear Iran in order to understand the new game and to have red lines and to put into place policies for the two of them. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Mahmoud Muhareb, for presenting us with this stance. We'd like to open the floor for questions. Hopefully, you wouldn't comment, you would just ask the question succinctly. And thank you.
When you spoke of Iran being closer to Turkey than the Arab countries in general and the Gulf countries in particular, you did not pay attention to Iranian intervention in Syria, which at least in that respect, in my opinion, is in contradiction to Turkey's position vis-à-vis Syria. How do you explain that?
Again to Mr. Baskan. Turkey now is planning to build atomic reactors in agreement with Russia. Any plan for uranium enrichment in this plan? Other words, is Turkey planning to have atomic bomb in future?
Thank you very much. From the first and second sessions and from Dr. Azmi's paper, it seems that there is focus on the technical aspects of the agreement. In my opinion, the political considerations is more important. Iran now has gained recognition of joining the nuclear club, even if that's postponed till sometime later. And when the American Secretary of State says there will be no solution in Syria without Iran, and also Iran is close to Turkey because there is a struggle between the Turkish nationalism, Turani, Turkish nationalism, and Persian nationalism. Thank you. Doesn't it look like the double standards followed by the Western countries and the United States in particular is an obstacle now to making the Middle East a nuclear-free weapon area and weapons of mass destruction? And this kind of double standards, which maintains for Israel its nuclear capabilities and at the same time tries to contain and minimize any Iranian nuclear threat against Israel. Don't you think that this will be an obstacle in the way of any understandings between, say, Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, who is a Middle East country and has nuclear capabilities, and also from Arab countries acquiring a nuclear weapon? Thank you, Chair. My question is to the Turkish professor. With all due respect to the brotherly people of Turkey, you said that there is a Turkish animosity towards Zionism and Jews. My question is, where was the Turkish people before the current government came to power, when Turkish support was fully supporting Israel? So have the Turkish people awakened now only? In fact, what's happening is all economic, and you talked up yourself about commercial exchange, gas, etc. Is there any more questions? Okay, we take one last question, maybe.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask Professor Baskan. I really have kind of disappointed about the way you present people of the region and their belief in conspiracy theories about Jews or Israelis. Uh, I don't know if that's really objective analysis. I don't feel these are the Turkish Islamists I knew for so many years. So if you can explain that, please. Thanks.
Thank you. I think this will be enough. Now we will start with Dr. Baskan, and we give him 3 minutes to respond.
Okay, very good questions and difficult one. I shouldn't have been here. About Syria, I didn't say that Turkey is a puppet of Iran. I just said Turkey, since in the 2000s and during the Arab Spring, wanted to hedge between Arab world and then the Iran, trying to put a distance as much as possible to both sides. Turkey refused to make a choice between Iran and then the Arab world. For example, when it came to Yemen, for example, when it came to Bahrain, for example, Turkey totally sided with the GCC. But when it comes to Syria, Turkey stood with the Arab world. To a certain extent, Turkey has its own designs about Syria. And it doesn't mean that Turkey's relations with Iran is going to change its own policies. So we have very complicated, messy relationship here. And what is Turkish design about Syria? It might be natural gas or some other support of the Muslim Brotherhood in Syria and on other places. So it's not that Turkey is just a puppet of Iran, but it is very clear that Turkey wants to keep a distance to both sides. The second one is Turkey nuclear energy issue. Yes, Turkey is pursuing peaceful nuclear issue, but Turkey has been researching on the atomic energy since 1950s. And then there is a good infrastructure, informational one, and also otherwise. I guess if Turkey wants to produce nuclear weapons, I guess it can do that without any difficulty. I guess it has a lot of also enriched uranium, which is really secret. But I guess that's partly is the safety that Turkey feels vis-a-vis Iran when it comes to the nuclear issue. But these are top secret issues that I really don't know much about it. Turkey has been, again, researching about the nuclear energy like the 1950s, 1960s. The Turkish Atomic Agency, for example, was established in 1948 and bought enriched uranium whenever it was free in the market. But the thing is that it never turned into that's all I know about the Turkish energy. But I don't think that it will have any difficulty in turning it into a nuclear weapon. About the animosity towards the Zionism and the Jews, I talk about the Turkish Islamists. I didn't talk about the broader Turkish society, especially the Turkish Kemalists and the seculars. When they pursue foreign policy, they pursued it with the national interest, what they thought in the interest of the Turkish state. So when they recognized Israel, for example, they were trying to appease the Americans, and then they were trying to be in the Western camp. When it developed very strong military relations with Israel, for example, in the 1990s, it was against Syria because Syria was supporting the PKK. And it was to fight the PKK, the Kurdish separatist organization. So if you look at the Turkish foreign policy from the 1950s, 1940s, all the way to the 2000s, there was this national interest at the heart of Turkish foreign policy, which is security-oriented, not economic-oriented. With the coming of the JDP, the Turkish foreign policy became desecuritized. It became much more economy-oriented and developing much stronger relations with the broader Islamic world. So there is a radical shift in terms of the Turkish foreign policy. But the anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, anti-Israelism of the Turkish Islamists is settled. Whichever book you just said, actually it is the oldest one, I believe. I am now doing a research on the Arab Islamists too. I guess it starts with, for example, Sayyid Qutb about this anti-Israeli discourse. But for the Turkey, for example, you can find a Turkish Islamists from the early 20th century, which are anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic, and anti-Zionism. So it is deeply ingrained in the Turkish Islamist. I guess it also answered the gentleman's question.
Thank you, Dr. Baskan. Now we give the floor to Dr. Mahmoud Muhareb. So far as the double standards are concerned, and towards Israel's nuclear capabilities and rejecting any other country from doing so, this is a very important issue which should be placed on the top of the agenda for any discussion, because Israel, when it was established, claimed that the nuclear weapon was a self-defense weapon, and the elites in Europe and America accepted it and provide justifications for it. But it's obviously now it's not the case anymore, and it's part and parcel of Israel's security doctrine, and it encourages Israeli aggression against others. So if we want to develop a vision, you should not develop a nuclear option just like that. You have to provide the justifications, the framework, the context, and so that people know, because some claim that some Arab governments are the main cause of threat against their own people. So we have to have enough force to counterbalance those who threaten us. And if you do that, you may gain something. But just to say that we want this and we want that, there is, of course, the discussion on the contextualization of all of this, and maybe a minimalist Arabic vision should be created, a common vision which should be created. Israel's monopoly on nuclear weapons is the worst scenario, but when you allow Iran to do the same, then you're squeezing between two nuclear powers. So you either have the option of becoming a puppet of this or a puppet of that, but you as an Arab should have your own pan-Arab security vision. Finally, we have to thank Sheikh Suhaim Al Thani, who delivered Dr. Khaled Al Dakhil's presentation, who could not make it to the workshop, and we thank Dr. Mahmoud Muhareb for his contribution on Israel's position vis-à-vis the nuclear agreement, and we thank Dr. Baskan for his intake, and thank you very much for attending this session.